Steve Kerr is on thin ice. The Warriors had a chance to re-sign him in the off-season, and they chose not to. Joe Lacob chose not to. To see what happens this season, after the debacle of a season that they had last season, where obviously Joe Lacob has been on some two-timeline crap that nobody really wants him to be on, because all you should focus on is the now, the right now, the Steph Curry era. It's not over. Steph Curry is still in his prime, the back end of his prime, but still in his prime. Steph Curry has given you 4 championships. You have an opportunity to get to championship number 5. And if you have the opportunity to do that, if you can match Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, the Spurs, the Lakers in rings in a certain era, you become immortal in NBA history. And then from there, you can try to go after MJ's number 6. But you can't do that if you can't get to number 5 first, and you can't get there if you continue to believe that you can try to build for the future while simultaneously competing right now. That doesn't make any sense, Joe. But that aside, Joe has been unhappy with how Kuminga has developed in the last couple of years. He hasn't liked how Moses Moody has developed in the last couple of years. He ended up having to trade James Wiseman because it wasn't working out with the team. But that is not Steve Kerr's fault that you ended up drafting a project who wasn't ready to be an NBA player. All that aside, Steve had a chance to get paid in the offseason. He did not get paid. And now this season has become a complete and utter disaster for so many different reasons. Now I'm going to identify for you exactly what that problem is, number 1. Number 2, I'm going to give you 3 viable solutions that is going to help the Warriors reboot the season and change everything. They still can't do that because there's still more than half the season remaining. The key is for Steve Kerr to consider these changes because changes are absolutely necessary in order for his team to not be 12th in the standings in the Western Conference. They're not only out of the playoff picture, they are out of the play-in picture. And that is unfathomable when you realize that the Warriors have the highest payroll in the league. You can talk about the Lakers struggling and all this stuff, and even they are ahead of the Warriors, and they are 10th in the league in payroll. What's happening is completely and utterly unacceptable. And again, there is a path to make this situation so much better. But in order for these things to happen, Steve Kerr needs to change his mindset. And he needs to realize that if he wants to stay in the league and not get bounced out of here after winning 4 championships, your legacy should be one of the greatest coaches of all time. But because of what you're doing now and your inflexibility and your rigidity and your stubbornness, you're in a situation where you have to walk. And a part of your legacy is complete and utter failure. That you flamed out. That the game has passed you. It doesn't have to be like this. But Steve must evolve. So I will present you the problem and provide 3 different viable solutions that is going to change everything for the Golden State Warriors. Let's get into it. Oh, before we do, I just want to let you know that this episode is being sponsored by Sheed, aka Warriors World. See the shirt? Great shirt. Fits really nicely around the arms, and it's just a really snug fit. It looks really nice. There's a lot of different shirts with a lot of different designs on the website, linked down below. Be sure to check it out. I'm just kidding. It's not being sponsored by anybody. I just wanted to give Sheed a shout out. He's my guy, and he hooked me up with the shirt, and it's awesome. So thank you. Okay, so it's pretty obvious what the Warriors' biggest problem this season is, and that is the defense. The Warriors' defense is completely and utterly broken. They were ranked 17th last season, and now they are ranked 22nd. 22nd? That's why you're one of the worst teams in the league. You can't defend anybody. You can't get any stops with the game on the line. The Warriors' defense has completely fallen apart since Steve Kerr lost Mike Brown 2 years ago. Last season, the Warriors ranked 17th on defense. This year, they are ranked 22 on defense. No wonder the team sucks. You can't win basketball games if you don't have a closing lineup that is capable of defending. And when you have a bunch of gaps throughout the game where you're putting out incapable defensive lineups. Terrible thing about that is that the Warriors have had defensive pieces all along. And Steve Kerr simply chose not to go that route. So this is 100% squarely on the decisions that Steve Kerr has been making. without Mike Brown assisting him to do otherwise. 2 years ago, the Warriors were the best defensive team in the league and they won a championship. The year before that, when Klay was missing, the Warriors were missing bodies. It was Wiggins' first official year. They had James Wiseman playing half the season, and they were still number 5 in the league defensively. So to lose Mike Brown and then to proceed to become one of the worst defensive teams in the league, I think the answer is pretty clear. The first thing the Warriors need to do, the first thing that Steve Kerr needs to do to help solve the Warriors' defensive problems is to go and hire a defensive assistant right now, as soon as possible. If he can do that, Monty Williams did that a week and a half back, and the Pistons have played better basketball since. I didn't even know that you could go and get a defensive assistant or any kind of coaching assistant in the middle of the season. Monty Williams showed that you can do that anytime you want. So Steve, you've lost Mike Brown and your defense has completely disappeared. You need to go and fix that first and foremost, because all the nuances of a good defensive team has been missing all season long. Whether it's the zone principles, whether it's the trap principles, whether it's the switch principles, it's just not there. And it's pretty obvious the players are not prepared game by game. Steve Kerr, clearly you are not a nuanced person. You kind of go into each game like a robot and do the same things every time, whether it's rotational decisions, whether it's the way you guard certain teams. You're just consistently underprepared. And that needs to change, and it can be changed if you bring in that defensive assistant. Nate McMillan is a pretty good defensive coach, I would say. If you have any ideas in terms of who they can look to bring in, please leave it down in the comments below. Kenny Atkinson, clearly not doing it. Frazier, clearly not doing it. I mean, you just don't have a guy. So go get a guy. So that's solution number 1. Solution number 2, you need to change your rotational decisions. The biggest one of all, Dario Saric playing the center position. Steve, you must identify the positions that your players belong in. You can no longer continue to think that players don't have a position. This principle is what is killing your teams. It happened in FIBA when you decided that Josh Hart and Mikal Bridges were good enough to put at the center spot. That's insanity no matter how you slice it. And you're doing it again with the Warriors. You didn't learn the lesson of not meddling when you went to FIBA and you had to step down for God knows what reason, but I'm willing to bet it's because people at the top realized that you suck, that your ideologies are kind of dog water. I think that the presence of Draymond Green has severely confused Steve Kerr, because Draymond Green came into the league as a tweener power forward who was actually kind of a small forward. He's at the size of a small forward because he's 6'6", and yet he could play power forward. Not only can he play power forward, he can, for a short stint, play center for the team. That's what the whole death lineup thing was all about. The fact that Draymond could hold his ground at the center position. Now, how do you determine what player can or cannot play a certain position? It's by determining whether that player can actually defend that position. So, for example, you put Dario Saric at the 5, but can he do the things that is required of a 5 at the center spot, the anchor spot? The answer is no. Is Dario Saric a shot blocker? No. Is he a paint protector? No. Is he an amazing communicator defensively? No. Can he even guard legitimate centers in the league? Mostly, no. That means Dario Saric is not a 5. Let's take a look at Andrew Wiggins. Is Andrew Wiggins capable of guarding most power forwards in the league? The answer is not really. Is he a good rebounder? No. Is he a good rebounder at his own position as small forward? No. He's mostly been rebounding worse than Steph Curry, his point guard, since he joined the Warriors. Now, I'm not going to get at him too much for that because he is at POA, and POA typically is out in the perimeter guarding the other team's best player. So how are you going to get a rebound when you're out in the perimeter, right? It doesn't really make sense. So that's understandable. But at the end of the day, the guy is 6'7", 205, 210 pounds. Typical power forwards are 225, 30 pounds if you're a tweener. A lot of those guys at those positions are like 240, 245, maybe some of them even 250 pounds. And you're putting Andrew Wiggins at that spot. Your power forward and center tandem have to be your most reliable combination of rebounders on the team. So by putting Sarge at the 5 and Wiggins at the 4, and for Kuminga is the exact same story as Wiggins. He's not a 4. He's not capable of guarding players that are significantly bigger than him at that position. He's not capable of rebounding over those guys at that position. So that's already 3 guys that are incorrectly placed positionally. And this is killing your defense. You have to give Draymond more respect for what he's been able to do in terms of switching positions, guarding multiple positions, and being capable of playing at least 3 positions. This is not normal. You're acting like that's normal and that somehow he changed the game. And in a way he has, because there's a lot of 3s that have shifted to playing the 4 position. Take Aaron Gordon, for example. The guy started his career as a 3 and is now a permanent 4. I believe Draymond helped that become a real thing. Of course, positional switchability existed before Draymond. Because he's done it so well, it's become a more common concept around the league. But the key to making that work is to make sure that you put a guy who's actually capable of guarding that position and fulfilling the roles that position requires. If a player doesn't have that capability, you shouldn't put him there. You're going to hurt that player because he's not going to be good playing that position. And that's what Steve Kerr has done with just about everybody on his roster. So first and foremost, identify what position the players on your team can actually play. This will greatly enhance the team overall, and it will make the team look completely different to close games. So another example of that would be putting Steph Curry at the 2 instead of keeping him at the 1. And you're doing that in order to get Chris Paul into the lineup to close games. That's a huge mistake. Steph Curry is not a 2. Steph Curry can maybe play 2 for very short stints, but not to close a game. You're putting him at the 2 and forcing him to guard much bigger players. It doesn't make any sense. The guy is 36 years old. And then you put a 6-footer next to him. How is that going to work defensively? The answer is it's not going to work defensively. You're going to be at a deficit every time. You're going to have to double everybody because nobody can guard anybody one-on-one. Steph Curry and Chris Paul are sharing the floor at the same time, and yet, most of the time, they're not even guarding the other team's point guard. What does that tell you? That means these 2 guys who are small point guards are now forced to guard a shooting guard or a wing, or sometimes even bigger. And then they're on an island, and then they're screwed. Now, why are they not guarding the other team's best point guard? It's because the POA is doing that job. So it's Wiggins or Kuminga guarding the Jamal Murrays, the De'Aaron Foxes, the Luka Doncic, the James Hardens, the CJ McCollum, the Devin Bookers. You see what I'm saying? So if Steph Curry and Chris Paul are not guarding those guys, they are usually guarding another dude who is like 6'7". It's just mismatches everywhere. It doesn't work. So, Steve Kerr, stop saying that the game of basketball is positionless. This idea and concept is destroying your team. You have to identify which players can play which positions and then keep them there. Steph Curry is a 1. Keep him there. If there's a situation where you have to put him to the 2, then that's not the right move to make. In other words, Chris Paul cannot be in your closing lineup. It is literally that simple. Klay Thompson, you should probably almost primarily keep him at the 2. Andrew Wiggins should almost always play the 3. He should not be at the 4 unless you have no remaining bodies left that are capable of playing the 4. You have Garuba. He's a 4. You should look to stick Garuba at the 4 before you think of putting Wiggins at the 4. You're hurting Wiggins' career by putting him in a position that he doesn't belong in. It's the same thing with Jonathan Kuminga. And Dario Saric, for the love of God, he is not a 5. Stop playing him there. Stop playing Dario Saric at the 5 in fourth quarters. You did that the last game against the Raptors. They instantly got out to a 9-3 run, and the game was over before you had any chance of making a run. Even against the Pistons, you played Dario Saric as center for 7.5 minutes. In the final 2.5 minutes that he played, the Pistons went on a 10-0 run. This is how they made a comeback. This is happening over and over and over again. Go watch the film, please. If you only had these pieces available to you, I would understand. It's not the case. You have Trace Jackson Davis which allows you to play him as center, and then you could put Dario at the 4, where he belongs. He is a stretch 4, power forward, good rebounder, good help defender, not an anchor. It's such a simple solution, and it will make your defense worlds apart better than what it is now. To close a game, you don't have to worry about this anymore because Chris Paul is injured, but all you had to do was keep CP out of the closing lineup. You could have closed with Steph, Clay, Wiggins, let's say just for the sake of argument, either Dario or Kuminga at the 4, and you can get away with Kuminga at the 4 because the rest of the lineup is well protected. You have a POA in Wiggins, and then you have Clay and Steph, and then Trace will be there to protect the paint. Now, I realize to begin the last game against the Raptors, that exact lineup played, and they got killed. Why? Because offensively it was a disaster. There wasn't a secondary creator on the floor, and that was a major issue. And if that becomes an issue to close a game, then you can stick Pods in there instead of Wiggins or Clay, depending on who's having the better game. Clay and Wiggins have just been so inconsistent this season, so whoever has it going, keep them in the game, and maybe bring in Pods, who is a great rebounder, better rebounder than either Clay or Wiggins, and you can mess around in this way. But more importantly, part of the reason why they failed so badly was because they were so bad on offense. Why were they so bad on offense? Because Steph Curry is the only true facilitator when you have a lineup of Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, and Trayce Jackson-Davis. Which means Steph Curry has to be on the ball, playmaking as the primary playmaker, run off a bunch of stuff on the pick and rolls, and they weren't doing that. Steph Curry got off the ball like he always does and just went to the corner, expecting the rest of his teammates to execute in the motion offense. And that's a terrible game plan. And the thing about the closing lineup is that you don't have to do that. You can go to the pick and rolls, the high pick and rolls, the DHOs, and simplify the game in that way. And then defensively, you'll do a better job. It's tricky though. You do need better communicators. And ultimately, I don't think this will even be an issue anymore once Draymond comes back. Because now you will have Trayce Jackson-Davis, Draymond Green, 2 guys that can really play the power forward and center spots. This has been missing for the last 2 years since the Warriors lost Otto Porter Jr. They just haven't had a guy who's capable of closing games at the power forward position. And that is a giant problem that the Warriors have had. It is insane to me that the Warriors front office has not recognized this and has not sought to solve this problem. They actually went into the playoffs last year without an actual viable power forward. They thought that Jonathan Kuminga was that guy. They found out that he wasn't that guy. And then suddenly you're left to have GP2 at power forward. You're left to have Moses Moody at power forward. Anthony Lamb, two-way player, didn't really play. JaMychal Green is a center on the Warriors. Talk about insanity. You have to identify these things in order to be able to solve the problems that the Warriors have had. I just solved it for you. Their defense is about to be much better once Draymond comes back and he has Trace by his side to close the game. Solution number 3, go get a trade. I've already talked about this in my previous video where they need to get off of Chris Paul, probably Klay Thompson, and Kuminga. Now, you've seen the trade rumors about the Raptors having some level of interest in Kuminga, Andrew Wiggins, Pascal Siakam is available, and the Warriors absolutely need to go after that because that is the only viable name that is a power forward that is in the trade rumors right now. And Pascal Siakams don't grow on trees. I understand that people are skeptical or concerned because he may be a rental. But the Warriors, their odds of winning a championship goes up by this much if you get a Siakam. And like I said at the beginning of this video, the 5th championship in the Steph Curry era is everything for this franchise. It needs to be everything. And Siakam instantly makes the Warriors that much better. So, if Siakam has a clear role with the team, and they manage to go get their 5th championship, and the Warriors don't want to pay Klay the money that he wants to get paid, which is like $35 million or something like that, use that money to keep Siakam, and then do whatever moves that are necessary to be able to keep him. Does the idea of Steph Curry and Siakam now sound enticing to you? Pascal Siakam is in his prime right now. Steph Curry is at the back end of his prime right now. So he has that legitimate secondary option that is going to really help curtail some of the pressure off of him. There's a lot of paths to be able to keep Siakam beyond this season. And playing next to a guy like Steph should be very enticing for him as well. We can't think of this as a purely rental situation. Now, there are some other viable names that I believe that the Warriors can go after. I'll make a separate video on that one. But for the time being, go get a trade that is a viable closer. I love Trace, but going into the playoffs, you need a guy who's more of a veteran. See, 2 years ago, the Warriors had Otto Porter to close games. Sometimes they would also close with Looney. And sometimes they would close with GP2. So you need a number of different options against a number of different teams in the playoffs. All of these pieces are needed, and the Warriors certainly still need that legitimate stretch four, which is not Wiggins, which is not Kuminga. So 3 solutions. Go pick up a defensive assistant, fix your rotations, and figure out which players belong in which position. And stop thinking that you can play anybody at any position, because that is what's killing the Warriors. Solution number 3, go get a trade. These 3 things happen, I just about guarantee that the Warriors are going to win their 5th championship this season. Mark my words. Let's see what the front office does, and let's see what Steve Kerr does. Because if Steve Kerr doesn't fix problem number 2, which is to figure out which positions his players can and cannot play, then none of this matters. He's going to burn this team, and then he's going to be out of here. And by that time, it's going to be too late, because the Warriors will have squandered their opportunity to win their 5th championship, just like they did last year because of Steve. Fix up, Steve. You're costing the Warriors everything. And you can quickly fix this situation with some of the ideas that I provided in this video. Best of luck.